next hour, we're going to be travelling into the future, and I'm going to hand over to the Editor-in-Chief of Travel Weekly Group. Please give a warm welcome to Lucy Huxley.
Well, thank you, Daisy, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to most of you who came back after lunch. I'm pretty sure that the sunshine and the pool were quite a temptation out there, but we really appreciate coming back. And you'll, of course, seen your programmes, and you know we now have a cracking session up next. It's called Tomorrow's World, Travel into the Future. And the aim is to look at the changing face of our industry and its strategies for dealing with uncertainty and also capitalising on market disruption. So we're going to cover globalisation, growth in new source markets, changing destination profiles, and the changing dynamics of the airline sector. And it'll be led by the bosses of 3 leading travel companies. Now, I'm always really wary about using the term industry heavyweights, because obviously you run the risk of offending some people. But when you consider the next 3 speakers that we have and the size of the businesses that they run and their industry knowledge and experience, then heavyweights is a pretty fitting description. And frankly, it's when you start getting referred to as industry veteran that you've really got to worry, guys. So we're going to hear, first of all, from Dominic Paul, who is Senior Vice President for Royal Caribbean International, Celebrity Cruises and Azamara Club Cruises. From Andrew Swaffield, who is the CEO of the Monarch Travel Group, and Nick Longman, the Managing Director of TUI UK and Ireland. We're going to hear from each of the gentlemen in turn, and then I'm going to ask them to join me at the chairs for questions, including some from you. So please do take part and ask those burning questions. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage from Royal Caribbean, Dominic Paul.
Thank you, Lucy. Lucy asked me to give you a glimpse of what Royal Caribbean International has done in China over the last few years, because we have really been very active in that market. Now, I was going to talk about some other things, but she who must be obeyed. I did not want to get into trouble. I didn't want to be called a heavyweight. So I'm going to stick to China, but then I know we've got a Q&A a little bit later. So let me just talk a little bit about what Royal Caribbean International has done over the last few years. So it's Royal Caribbean International, Celebrity Club Cruises and Celebrity Cruises and Azamara Club Cruises. 10 years ago, we were 29 ships, and international accounted for about 10% of our global revenues. Now we're 40 ships. We've replaced smaller, older ships with newer, bigger ships. And international is about 50% of our global business. What's interesting is that the last 2 years has seen a pace of growth that has been unprecedented in our history. So we have grown very fast internationally over the last 2 years and have added nearly $1 billion worth of revenue to our business internationally just over the last 2 years. Where has that growth come from? Well, over the next few years, we're going to have significant growth coming from UK and the European markets. As Justin covered this morning, I also am very bullish about the UK market. All 3 of our cruise lines, Royal, Celebrity and Azamara, are investing heavily in the UK market. I think we feel very strongly that the UK market has got a very bright future, and we will see significant growth coming out of the UK market, so growth from the UK market over the next few years. So I think that's very good news for the UK travel industry. And we also feel quite positive about Europe generally, partly because Europe is a fantastic place for people to go on holiday, but also because the economies are gradually picking up. So that's one part of the story, and I would say that the UK market is a key core anchor to our strategy there. But there's another side to our international strategy which creates much bigger growth over the next few years, and that is Asia. So we have a lot of growth coming from Singapore and Australia, but the primary driver of the growth from our business over the next few years is actually the Chinese market. So we've all heard quite a lot about China already today. There have been quite a few comments about the potential there, but also some of the potential downfalls as well. So I thought it'd be worth taking a step back and saying, why is China interesting for us? Well, the first thing is, it's the second largest economy in the world. It's a population of about 1.4 billion people. Big deal, so what? But there are 220 million middle class in China, and that number is growing every single day. So I think it was Justin that said that no one has a clue what the actual economic growth is in China. And interestingly, we got 3 to 4 economists together a couple of years ago when we were working through our Chinese growth strategy. And I was asking them the question as to what do they think would happen over the next few years. And there were 4 people that I spoke to, and I got 4 different answers. So my conclusion was no one had a clue. So in those kind of instances, what can you do? The best thing you can do is go to the market and get a feel for yourself. Because actually, nothing is like going to a market and understanding it yourself as opposed to reading about it. And the thing that you will notice in China is that the pace of change is breathtaking. It is growing so quickly, and you don't need to see the economic data to support an instinct that says this is an economy that is going to continue to grow. Whether it is growing at 4% or 5% or 7% is almost academic. The fact is, it's growing very quickly, and it's a huge economy and a huge number of people, which means that the weight of that economy growing becomes exceptional. It becomes a huge opportunity. The other thing is, when we look at it, we can see if we project out for the next 5 to 10 years, we think that the cruise demand will outweigh the supply that's going in there. So for the cruise industry, it's a very, very good opportunity. I was in Hong Kong last week, and we were having lunch with the Hong Kong government, and they were talking to us about their infrastructure investments, which again, something that Justin touched on today, which was how long does it take to build a new runway in the UK? How long does it take to build new roads? Years. In the time that it's taken the UK to talk about the potential third runway at Heathrow, so over the last 5 years, China has added 45 new airports in that period of time. And these aren't just like single runway airports, they're multi-runway, 24-hour-a-day airports. They are building new ports. Literally, every month that we go to China, another new port has been created for our ships. In Hong Kong last week, they talked about the new rail link that was going into from Hong Kong to mainland China. Within a 1-hour train ride of Hong Kong from 2016-2017, when that new rail link goes in, there will be 60 million people within a 1-hour train ride of Hong Kong city centre. Within a 4-hour train ride, which is when we put a cruise ship somewhere, we look at really what is a 4-hour radius. Within a 4-hour train ride from Hong Kong, there are 250 million people. That's the population of the United States of America, pretty much there. I mean, it is mind-boggling how big everything is in China. In Shanghai, the population is 24 million. It was 23 million about 10 months ago. It's now 24 million, which is bigger than the entire population of Australia. Now, not all of those people have got the wealth to go on holiday, but a lot of them have. You only need to drive in downtown Shanghai or Beijing to see the cars and the houses and the apartments, to see that actually there is a lot of money being created in China. That provides an incredible opportunity for the cruise industry. It also provides an incredible opportunity for all of you sitting here who are looking at growing your business internationally. Because Chinese guests are absolutely hungry for new experiences. They haven't been able to travel for many years. They are now able to travel, and travel is one of the #1 areas where they want to spend their money. They want to explore the world. They want to explore new opportunities. From a cruise industry perspective, that's why we're investing so quickly. However, it's a very, very complicated market to do business in. Anyone who tells you that it's easy to set up in China and make money is lying. It's difficult, it's complicated, and it's really different to doing business anywhere else that we've done business before. And it takes years, really, to learn how to do business there. So what's our success in China look like? Well, in 2010, we were about 40,000 guests out of China. This year, in 2015, we're nearly 400,000 guests. And next year, we're growing to just under 700,000 guests out of China. So we will have grown from 40,000 guests to 700,000 guests in 6 years. That's an unprecedented level of growth. And in 2015, we became market leader in China. So we took some big risks, we put extra capacity in the marketplace, and we became market leader in 2015. And between 2014 and 2016, we're seeing 170% growth rates in the China market. So how have we done this? Four key areas. So focus on customer, our people, the brand, creating the brand in China, distribution, ensuring we have the right distribution. Now I'm going to talk about customer, trigger finger here. So the customer is the most important thing for everything that we've done in China, and we've learned the market as we've gone through. So we have adapted our products significantly to the Chinese market. It's no good just going into China and behaving like you would do in another market. You actually have to adapt your business and adapt your product to the China market. We took that a step further by saying, traditionally in the cruise industry, what people do is they put their older ships into a market, and then they gradually build newer ships. And that period of time normally takes anywhere from 15 to 20 years. We turned that on its head, and last year we announced that we were putting Quantum of the Seas, a brand new billion-dollar ship, into China, which we launched this year. And then we're launching another brand new ship next year in 2016 with Ovation of the Seas. So next year we'll have 5 ships in China, and 2 of those ships will be the newest ships. So we've got the best hardware in the world sailing out of China. We did this because the customer is the heart of everything we're doing in China. The Chinese customer loves new, they love big, they love exciting, and we knew that that would be a breakthrough move for us in the China market. So that's a big step that we took in putting Quantum of the Seas into China. The second thing is people, which is you cannot run a business in China, and you'll increasingly see this as you expand your businesses around the world. You cannot operate your business from your head office. Whether that head office is in the UK or United States, wherever it is, you have to run your business locally. And we've spent the last 6 years developing an empowered team of people in China who truly own their business. Now, sometimes that can be uncomfortable because they want to change aspects of the product that we're not totally convinced should be changed. However, we have to have trust that they are the closest ones to the market. And in everything that they have pushed for, they have been absolutely correct. So we've changed the entertainment, we've changed the food, we've changed how we sell, and we've done that because we have a localized, empowered team of entrepreneurial people who run our business in China. And we have gone from a team of, this is excluding the crew that we've got in China, just our office-based teams and our salespeople, we've gone from a team of 30 people to 200 people just in 2 years. So we've really expanded that team quickly. Brand, we are investing heavily in our brand. We're spending tens of millions of dollars a year creating the #1 brand in China because we spent the last 6 years learning that market. Once you've learned the market and you know that works, you have to back that up with investment, and that's what we're doing now. So we are localizing all of the marketing that we're doing in China, and in fact are effectively relaunching what we're doing next year. But in the meantime, this is how we communicated Quantum of the Seas in China.
皇家加勒比海洋量子号，期待看得更远，梦想飞得更高，感知科技的魅力，这一切超乎你的想象。皇家量子号，来自未来的邮轮。
Don't worry, that did say in Mandarin, contact your local travel agency. Distribution, we have totally changed how we sell in China. So we now have over 60 sales managers in China, which means our sales force in China is actually bigger than it is in the United States. Now, the reason we can put this investment in China is because we have an incredibly strong core business in the United States. However, we are now investing disproportionately in the China market because we're growing it from a low base. So we ourselves are investing in growing that distribution. What we have learned in markets like the UK is that our trade partners, are critical to our success. And I think we have built up really strong long-term partnerships. That is no different in China. We've learned that, and we're now investing, but in a different way with our trade partners in China. So and the Chinese, they generally sell kind of like wholesalers there. So if you've got one travel agency, they'll often sell through 30 or 40 different sub-agents. So in 2013, we had 110 core travel agency contracts. That's 750 that we've done now. So we have now gone into all the major cities and have strong distribution in all of those cities. Have there been bumps in China? This is just this year. We have had a really challenging year. So MERS, probably some of you know that, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, there was a breakout in South Korea. Every one of our ships goes to South Korea, which means we had to change every single one of our itineraries in China. We've had 9 typhoons in China. The average is normally 2. So 9 just so far this year of Category 4 typhoons, which meant a significant number of itineraries have changed. The stock exchange has fallen, there are talks about the economy slowing, and the local currency has declined. The fact is, we have come up with what we think are innovative solutions to every single one of those shocks, because we've had to, and this is where the travel industry is brilliant. You are all brilliant at being adaptive and adapting yourself to the local market, and that's what we've needed to do in China. So we've changed how we sell this year because of the shocks in the economy. We've changed the compensation we give in terms of typhoons because there have been so many. We've done that because we've got a local team that is able to adapt quicker than we could if we were doing it from a head office in America or the United Kingdom. So what are our lessons? One, never forget your customers and put your business around the customers. Invest in your brand, get a really strong local team of people in the market that you want to grow in, and really strengthen your distribution. However you distribute your product, distribution is key. And for us, the travel agents are critical to our future in China. Run the business locally. Third, stay flexible. There will be shocks. You know, we're going to talk about that in a little while in the panel. There'll be multiple shocks all of us face. The key is to stay very flexible and know when to ride out the shocks. Sometimes you have to accept that a market is going through a difficult time that will probably last for 10 years and you need to change your strategy. Other times, like we've seen with China this year, it's a bump in the road and we feel committed to the long-term future of that market because you can sense and feel the long-term potential. In that case, you have to ride out those shocks and you have to invest for the long term. Because this business has been around for many, many years, the travel industry has been around for many years, and it's those who disrupt the market, who invest for the future, and who are willing to take some calculated risks in that, who will become the true winners of the future. And that, to me, is my message to this team here, which is, if you're willing to do those things, the future of this business is bright, not just in the UK market, but globally. For businesses high quality as yours, there are global opportunities that are out there for you to take. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dominic. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage the CEO of Monarch, Andrew Swaffield.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I don't have any slides, but I just wanted to spend a little while talking to you about my view of the changes that aviation is facing, particularly in Europe. To give that a bit of context, I thought I would start by taking you through a reminder of the journey that Monarch went on last year. Most of you will be familiar with it at some level, and then I'll give a bit of a perspective on my own thoughts going forward. So I joined the Monarch Group last April and was brought in after a career in IAG. The way that Monarch was sold to me during the recruitment process was that it had been restructured, it had returned to profitability, and they wanted to grow it. It had also been owned for 47 years by the same owners, which led me to assume that they would be around for the next 47 years. It turned out that I was wrong on just about all of those counts, and it reminded me this morning when I was listening to Ian and Justin's presentations about how we deal with the unexpected, because when you are suddenly confronted with a set of circumstances which are very different to the ones you expect, that's when resilience and risk really do begin to kick in. To cut a long story short, we basically spent last year trying to adapt to the new set of circumstances and decide how to restructure Monarch to make it successful. And broadly speaking, that restructure took the following steps. So we took out £200 million permanently out of the cost base, broadly speaking, an £800 million business, so a very big chunk of costs coming out. That was done through labor costs. We lost 700 employees out of a workforce of around 3,500. We had to persuade the workforce to take pay cuts of 30 to 35% and get them to vote in favor of that, which they did in overwhelming numbers, I'm pleased to say. We reduced the size of the fleet by 10 aircraft and returned 10 aircraft to the lessors, pared back our operation, simplified it, stopped flying long haul, where we had 2 aircraft, and stopped flying charter, which was 15% of our operation, and focused entirely on the European low-cost carrier model, effectively, as a scheduled-only carrier. We also had a big pension deficit of around £160 million on the balance sheet, the full buyout cost of around 660 million. Clearly, when it became obvious that we had to find new owners last year, nobody would buy us with that pension deficit. And that ended up going into the Pension Protection Fund, which is a fund paid for by industry levies on pensions, designed to be a safety net for just such an event. The basic restructure of the company then happened in about 3 months, and at the same time we needed to find new owners. So we completed the deal around a year ago on the 24th of October. At the same time, managing the media and trying to maintain business relatively normally and ensure that people remained confident enough to carry on booking with us. So it was a challenging and interesting year. I've become a master of understatement, and I'm quite gratified a year on to be in such a beautiful place as Costa Navarino, talking to you, whereas a year ago I was locked away in a dungeon in a law office in London, eating far too many chocolate bars and working till midnight. And I know where I'd rather be, frankly. This is a testament to the success of that restructure, the fact that I'm able to stand here and talk to you about it. The financials of the business were that we lost £94 million last year as a profit before tax loss, and we will have turned that around with a more than £100 million turnaround and make a profit in the double-digit millions by the end of this October. I talked about our winter losses being reduced by around 40 million, and around 10 million of that was fuel benefit, and 30 million was down to the things we had done. So roughly three quarters of the improvement in profit is self-help, and a quarter came from the tailwinds that we got from lower fuel prices, which were very welcome. So that's the context, if you like, upon which I base my comments around my view on the future of European aviation. And I guess that it's important to say that I didn't know any of that when I joined Monarch. I'm not a masochist. I probably wouldn't have joined had I known all of that. But it did turn out to be an extremely fascinating experience, and very rewarding in many ways. And I was really quite amazed by how people will draw together in a crisis and work together. So what do I think about the future of aviation in Europe? Well, I think there are several trends which I've touched on in my introductory remarks about the Monarch story. One is, I think that the charter model is going to be confined to the likes of TUI and Thomas Cook, the big vertically integrated guys, and the specialists like Titan and other ACMI providers. I don't believe the charter model has a future in the kind of Monarch model. And I really don't believe that it's possible to run a scheduled carrier and a charter carrier with the same aircraft. The two businesses are quite different, and I think that it's important to focus on one or the other. So I think the charter model is effectively disappearing as an option to independent tour operators. And that, I suppose, brings challenge and potentially fear for some people. But my very strong view is that tour operators and other intermediaries who are interested in getting airlift need to learn how to work with low-cost carriers, scheduled carriers, and low-cost scheduled carriers need to learn to work with tour operators. There's a bit of a cultural gap there that needs to be bridged, and at the moment they're both sort of eyeing each other up from opposite banks of the river, but we need to encourage that cooperation. Monarch has a history of working with tour operators, and so we are more comfortable with that. And I can see early signs of people like EasyJet beginning to do more of it, and I think it's a good thing. I would encourage you all to, if you're challenged by that particular change, I would encourage you to try and meet with the airlines concerned and educate them about your requirements and your business, and try to understand a bit about their business model and see if you can help to bridge that gap. I also believe that there are too many airlines in Europe. There are about 86 airlines in Europe, and roughly half of them are challenged with a cost base which is too high. There is, I think, only 30 of the top 150 airlines in the world are European, and that's disproportionately low. So it's very much a group of the winners and losers that you're beginning to see. And we can see very successful airlines and very real struggling airlines in Europe, and it's a similar story across the world. But Europe is probably the most extreme example. So my prediction is that there will be significant merger and acquisition activity, significant consolidation happening across the aviation space in Europe, and you can pretty much divide between those who have restructured their cost base successfully and those who have not. I don't necessarily think the winners and losers will be split by size, but I think they will be defined by whether or not they have a clear brand, whether or not they have some kind of distinctive customer segment which differentiates them a little bit, and whether or not they have lowered their cost base to a suitable level so that they can drive sustainable profits. It is a very asset-heavy business running an airline, and if you don't get those costs right, you are going to face significant challenges. So too many airlines, my prediction is that there will be significant consolidation. I think there'll be winners and losers. I think you'll see those who haven't restructured facing great difficulty and having to restructure. Those of you who saw the news in Paris saw some unfortunate Air France managers being confronted by very angry trade unions. As a result of that video, we're now ordering Velcro shirts for our senior managers. But the haves and the have-nots, I think, are going to be more distinct. We will also, as I predict, see more charter carriers disappearing and becoming scheduled carriers, notwithstanding the big successful vertically integrated groups that I've already mentioned and the specialist ACMI guys. And I believe that those trends will really begin to bed in over the next 5 to 10 years. They're slightly slowed down by geopolitical interference in the airline world, where ownership is still dictated by national governments, but it is beginning, I think the tide is really beginning to now come in on that front. I want to conclude my remarks by just talking about some of the things that I think are important from a leadership point of view in terms of managing risk and managing a business that is faced with challenges. And probably the most important thing is what I mentioned at the beginning, which is adapting to that change very quickly, learning what the circumstances are, actually objectively assessing them, and managing your new reality, because we may well feel afraid when we find ourselves in changed circumstances, but the longer we're in fear, the longer the period before we start to adapt. If we can adapt quickly, then there's no reason to be afraid. We were facing what many would see as, a very, very serious challenge to our business. But if you stay calm and focused and you accept the circumstances as they are rather than as you would like them to be, and you work together as a team, then you can work your way through it. There are also a lot of experts out there as well, and it's worth remembering if you're running a business that's facing big risks and resilience issues, that there are experts out there. None of us are experts in specific subjects. Many of us are generalists and managers in the travel industry. But having specific legal experts or specific financial experts or restructuring experts really adds value in difficult situations. And of course, when you have experts, you have to listen to them. And I was struck by somebody telling me recently that the word listen and the word silent are anagrams of each other, which is something I didn't always appreciate. And last year, it was very important to actually listen silently to advice and actually take that advice on board. And that's something that I would encourage you as well if you're ever in challenging situations with your business. The other piece is around finance, and I'm no finance expert, and I've built a career over 30-odd years managing things, and I suppose become relatively numerate, but last year I had very much a crash course in corporate finance. And the one thing you learn is that cash is what keeps businesses alive. And provided you have sufficient cash, then your business will survive whatever is thrown at it. The presentation from Justin this morning talked about the aspects of financial planning around your family, which I thought was very interesting. And actually, we can apply that to our businesses, because if you were to do a bit of cash flow planning in your business and see the degree to which you can influence that, I guarantee you that for those of you who haven't done it, you would find it a very enlightening experience and a very powerful one. And it's always best to do that when times are good and to be in a position where you're on the front foot. So corporate finance and cash management, accepting the circumstances as they are, the reality of the situation, using advisors and listening, all of these things are very important. But my prediction for aviation is a period of great change, a period of flux. I think it brings opportunity. We should all benefit from it. There will be stronger airlines at the end of the process, and that's a good thing for the whole travel industry. Weak airlines are a bad partner for anyone, and all of us should be encouraging stronger airlines across Europe. So those are my thoughts. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you later on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And now, certainly last but not least, Nick Longman from TUI.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to feature this afternoon, I'm going to talk about how having a successful business, what I think you need to do in order to take that business forward, and how you try and future-proof that as well. So at TUI, it has been a very successful business, and this year end, we're going to represent approximately 40% of the overall group's profitability. The cornerstone of that success and the cornerstone of our strategy has been around differentiated and exclusive product. Over 80% of what we sell is differentiated products and exclusive to us, and that's served us very, very well. But one of the challenges for me in coming into the business, I took over as MD on the 1st of June, is that how do you take that business that's doing well and how do you drive it forward? And I think you have to absolutely evolve, and I think you can't wait until something goes wrong, until your business model is challenged, before you decide that it's time to change. So I think you have to do that. And one of the first things we're looking at, and I'm looking at, is the continual evolution of our product. So we've introduced internally what we're calling the Magnificent Seven, and it's our 4 core hotel brands within TUI, which is TUI Blue, Magic Life, Riu, and Robinson Clubs, and then our 3 hotel concepts, Sensatori, Sensimar, and Family Life. And there's a huge focus going on to these, what we're calling the Magnificent Seven. That's where all of our future development is going. So I mentioned that we're over 80% differentiated. We have plans to grow our capacity over the next few years. Our strategy has served us well. We've remixed out of commodity product, out of flight only. Flight only is just over 10% of our business now, and we've moved that into differentiated product. But we now look for top-line growth as well. So even to stand still with our percentage of diff product, we have to find more differentiated product. I mentioned we have an international team. Over 70 people now work in a central department working effectively on those 7 brands. And internationalisation is great, but also the job of that team is to ensure that when we internationalise something, we don't lose the very essence that made it popular in that market as well. And customer insight is absolutely key. We have over 400,000 CSQs that we gather every year. We partake in multiple surveys, and we get lots of information through social media. I was with our pilots and cabin crew the last 2 days of last week, and one of their frustrations is they get lots of feedback and they don't feel we act on it. So again, I think one of the key things is when you get this feedback, it's all well and good collecting it. If it just sits on a shelf, then it's a waste of time. You have to really act on it. I mentioned that we're evolving our product. So what used to be called Thomson Couples for next season, for next summer, summer 16, is going into Sensimar. We felt that the couples name was a bit limiting. There are adults who want to go on an adult-only holiday who may not be in a couple, and calling it couples was limiting. We've looked at the best things that we have in Sensimar, which started out as a German concept. We've internationalized that. Couples is evolving. And similarly, Thomson Family Resorts, we've looked at the best family product in the group, and we're going to have a consistent group product that we call Family Life. The key to this is hoteliers as well, and the hotel partners that we have. We don't own all of our hotels. We own very few of our hotels, but we have long-standing relationships built up over many, many years, and they're absolutely key in order to drive that differentiation going forwards. And we can't be complacent. We mustn't rest on our laurels. There's often a phrase that's used, we can't become fat and happy, which is always slightly ironic because those are two of my core competencies. But we've got to be really confident of moving on and ensuring that we do the right things. So first of all, we need to diversify. And what we're really looking about here is new departure points. So we're always looking at real micro detail of profitability by airport. Can we introduce new lift into there? Can we go to existing places but from new airports? I was in Dublin last week. We've launched a long-haul program out of Dublin, the first direct flights from the Caribbean into Mexico and Jamaica, and it's created a huge buzz. And that's diversifying the Irish product portfolio. We're looking at new destinations as well. I was on a product trip to the Caribbean a couple of weeks ago. We visited some islands that we've never been to before in terms of a business, and we want to start to introduce new destinations as well. We announced yesterday that we are going to launch Sri Lanka, which is a new destination for us from next winter. Costa Rica starts for us in November, and I think it's really important that we continue to excite our customers with new destinations. That core focus will be on long haul. And one of the beauties of having an international business, the top right picture there is Royalton. Royalton is the hotel brand of our Canadian company, Sunwing. I recently visited our Royalton in Cancun, which is a fabulous unit, 700 rooms, very contemporary, great service, great facilities. And the great thing about working with Sunwing is they want 2/3 of the beds in the winter. We want 1/3. They only want 1/3 in the summer. We want 2/3. So we're going to look and work in partnership with them. Where they build, we will look to follow as well. And then cruise. There is a great buzz around cruise within TUI. We've got a new ship coming, Splendor of the Seas, which is going to sail as the Thomson Discovery next year. We have 2 more ships coming, Mein Schiff 1 and Mein Schiff 2, from our German cruise business, which will come in 18 and 19. So a significant increase in cruise. And we're also looking to stretch the product. So very interestingly, in Germany, our business has looked at how it can extend the season on cruises. And they've introduced something called a full metal cruise. And I'll show you a little video just to give you a flavour of what a full metal cruise is. That looks fun, doesn't it, eh? Who wouldn't want to go on one of those cruises? Who would want to go in that swimming pool, though, was the question. But I think we're probably unlikely to do heavy metal cruises out of the UK, but I think that's just an example where we need to look at our market, see what would work, and how can we get more out of the assets that we have. So in terms of flexibility, the charter airlines, the holiday airlines have always been used to 7, 10, bit of 11, 14 night. Those are the durations we've always operated. That's clearly not good enough in today's travel market. So we've introduced something we call 3PF, third-party flying. And last year we sold over 60,000 holidays that we packaged up using other people's flying with our product. and predominantly of different durations. We had thought when we started this that what we would see is people flying from airports where we had limited lift. Actually, what we saw, it was on the core destinations, but people looking for flexible durations. And we're going to significantly increase the number of third-party flying that we do this year. Using third-party flying, we can also go to new beach destinations, so destinations that TUI doesn't directly contract beds in. We've never done that before. For example, we could operate Mykonos if we want, using third-party flying. So we will look to go to other core med destinations where we don't have our own flying program. City breaks is very interesting. If you look at the top 20 search terms in Thomson, you have Paris, you have New York, you have Dubai, you have Las Vegas. Those are 4 places that we don't go to as Thomson, but clearly the customer expects that Thomson will service those destinations, so why shouldn't we? And I think this is where it's quite interesting that in rebranding to TUI, the research we've done on the TUI brand is that it has a slightly more wider appeal than the Thomson brand. And so in launching new products like city breaks, like long-haul cities, we feel that launching them under the TUI brand would probably give us a better chance of connecting with the customer. I should also make the point that in our retail, we sell a lot of holidays to these destinations. So clearly people expect it of us, and they come to our shops to book it as well. I think youth as well. I did a recent trip to Ibiza and was just amazed to see the money that's being generated in Ibiza with all of the clubs. We've got a great youth brand scene, but I think we can do a lot more in youth. So I think the core thing is, my message would be, we are really looking to diversify our business. We've got a good business, a cornerstone of our ongoing business will be differentiated core holidays. That will always be what we focus on. But I feel that we're in a mature enough place now to start doing some other things, not necessarily hugely new things, but other things that we haven't done before. And diversifying will clearly spread that geopolitical risk. Tunisia was a very tragic incident for us, and one of the things we had to do was we had to reprogram 27 flights a week that were going to Tunisia to other destinations. So the bigger spread of product, the greater breadth of destinations we have, it makes those contingency plans a little easier to implement. So I think key to that, one of those things about our future success is never forgetting your customer. Dominic referred to it earlier. I think Tesco's is a good example of a huge business, a business that had done fantastically well, that really took its eye off the ball. It didn't listen to what its customers were saying. It didn't listen to the fact that people wanted to shop more frequently, not maybe the big weekly shop that it had. And it's let people like Lidl and Aldi come in and take its market. And I think Lidl have been very brave and very bold. There was always an issue about quality. They've really invested in quality, and they've been brave enough to make some good claims about their products. So I think in summary, I would say you need to make changes when you're successful. Don't wait until the issues arise. Think ahead. Be bold and be brave. I think you have to take some risky decisions occasionally. You have to diversify to cover your risk. I think that's fairly obvious. And you've got to have really good people. I remember when I was at First Choice in the finance department, we got a new finance director in, and within 3 months, he had fired 6 of his 7 direct reports. I was the last one standing. And I went in to see him, and I said, why did you get rid of the last one? He was good. He said he was good, but he wasn't good enough. And we don't need people who are just good. They have to be really good. So maybe consider whether good enough is good enough. And whatever you do, do it quickly. I think Rue referred to seeking instant gratification earlier. I hope he finds it in Kalamata. But I think you have to do things quickly. There is absolutely no point in having an idea that takes 3 years to deliver. That idea probably won't be relevant in the market, and I think at TUI we've been very guilty of that, and that has to change. And then lastly, I just reiterate to listen to your customers, and don't just get feedback and leave it on the shelf. Actually react to it and do something with it. So we just had a little discussion in my new management team. So if TUI were a woman, which woman would TUI be? And the management team came up with Mary Berry. Fairly safe, fairly conservative, been around a long time, does a great job, generally loved, can be a little cheeky on occasions as well, surprises people occasionally. Nothing wrong with Mary Berry. But actually, who would we like to be as an organisation? What will give us a better fit for the challenges ahead? We said we'd like to be a bit more like Uma, a bit more of an edge to us, a little faster to move, a little bit pacier about what we do. So I think that's what we'd like to be, a bit more Uma, a bit less Mary. Okay, thank you.
Right, well, thank you, Nick. And if I can now just ask Dominic and Andrew to join us again on the chairs. Well, thank you all very much for your presentations. You all kept perfectly to time. You've even got 30 seconds left. Actually, something you mentioned at the end there, Nick, you were talking about that geopolitical instability, and I think that's an important thing to pick up because it was mentioned a number of times this morning as well, and how it's impacting on travel. And I think the number of destinations that are now being viewed, correctly or otherwise, as perhaps unsafe is certainly growing. And I know TravelZoo did a survey just last week, and they found that of the 2,000 adults they surveyed, most of them felt that Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, Turkey, Greece and Thailand were now among those countries that Brits were afraid to visit. So how does that impact on your future planning, both in the short and the long term, for the destinations that you're featuring, I guess, for you and for Andrew?
Well, certainly from our perspective, it clearly has an impact. We have very large programmes to those areas, and we have in other parts of the group our own hotels as well. What I find, though, is that customers are really resilient. You know, if I look at the sales profile, we are definitely seeing, Turkey aside because of the incident that we just saw at the weekend, but certainly with Egypt, with Morocco, Tunisia, again, it's not on, you can't fly there at the moment. But it doesn't take a long period of quiet news for customers to get that resilience back. And even with Tunisia, we're still selling Tunisia quite a lot every day. And those customers who are booking are saying to us, as soon as it's agreed that we can go back, we will go back. We're not going to let terrorists ruin our holiday. We've been to Tunisia for many years. So I think the first thing I would say is that the British customer is very resilient and won't let these types of things generally put them off. I think from our perspective, we have to be very pragmatic as well. And as I mentioned, when we had the Tunisia incident, we had to reprogram 27 flights within 2 days. And we put them into Spain, we put them into Portugal, we put them into Cape Verde. And we have to have contingency plans that said if there were incidents in any of these other areas, what would we do? And ultimately, we will always follow the government advice on this. We're never going to go against government advice in terms of safety.
And is it as simple as just putting more people in another destination? I mean, presumably there's a limit, and you know, have they got the flexibility to suddenly take a massive influx of extra people they weren't expecting?
No, it's not as straightforward as that. It is really complicated, and you know, if they were really good beds, hopefully we would have them already and be selling them. So it is complicated, but unfortunately this is the world we live in now. I think you have to have, and we did an exercise at the end of just a month ago at our board meeting where we went through lessons learned from the Tunisian thing, and I think it was, nowadays we will always need to have a contingency plan B and probably a contingency plan C, just to say what are we going to do, and a set of policies that we're ready to go with for our customers. So it's definitely changed the way we plan our business.
You're nodding, Andrew. Similar for you?
Yes, I mean, I agree with everything Nick said. The contingency planning, though, is a really important lesson, I think, for all of us in business. It's a good exercise to just go through that scenario planning of saying, if a market closed down tomorrow, what would it cost me from a financial point of view? What would be the cash impact on my business? And what would I do, you know, with those assets? It's not always sensible to simply fly somewhere else if you're an airline, because sometimes you'll just be putting too much capacity into another market and you'll be dragging down the rates and you'll end up in a zero-sum game. Sometimes it's the right decision to park the aircraft. Sometimes it's very, very easy. When Tunisia closed, following the government advice this year, it was less than 1% of our flying, but nonetheless still a big issue by our standards. And we were able to redeploy that flying to Spain because Spain has been performing very well this year. If a similar thing happened with, say, Egypt or Turkey, we may not make the same decision. And making those contingency plans and having them ready, knowing the size of the financial impact, knowing how many customers, having that information at hand is very, very useful, because you really don't want to be having to find that out after an event.
Yeah. Okay. And in cruise, Dominic, I mean, cruise lines always say, well, we've got boats, they move, we can put them somewhere else, you can move them away from the unrest or whatever the incident is. But is it really that simple? I mean, you mentioned MERS and the typhoons in Asia.
So it's certainly a lot easier than, say, if you've got a fixed hotel, because the ships, obviously you can move them and you can change the itineraries, but it's still really complicated. So the MERS is the best example. So this was an outbreak in South Korea, and you hardly saw it really in the UK or the US, but every single Chinese TV station and newspaper, the front pages and the main headlines was that people were dying of this Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome in South Korea. Every one of our ships went to South Korea. So to Nick's point, we needed to act really quickly. And we changed the itinerary of every single one of our Chinese sailings we did it over a 4-day period. And if we hadn't done that, we literally would have sold no cruises. So we changed them all. We managed to get berths in other places around the Asia region. But to Nick's other point, which is customers are very resilient. And once the outbreak had died out within South Korea, very quickly after that, people wanted to go back to South Korea. So it was a 10-week period where we changed all the itineraries, and then we went back to South Korea. Now, had we, let's say, not gone back so quickly, customers actually would have become frustrated because they said, well, it's okay to go to South Korea now, and we love South Korea, it's a beautiful place, and we want to go back there. So that's where you have to stay so close to customers, to what their needs are. And sometimes you have to be willing to go back to places quicker than you realized, because you have to follow the demand from a customer point of view. Safety first, but you have to follow the demand from a customer point of view, and that's staying close to your customer.
Yeah. And I mean, Nick, you were just talking about your investment in your differentiated product, and you've got all your sensory resorts. So I mean, that's tough for you because you've invested a lot in fixed hotels. Yeah. So what does that mean for you when you've got those beds to fill that you need to fill in your own portfolio?
I mean, practically what that tends to mean is if you cut your program down, you will cut down all the variable stock, all the beds that you contract in and you can get out of, and you'll focus your sales. But I think the other advantage, and it was quite interesting that our French business kept sending people to Tunisia, and our German business sent them in for a while longer. So there are different rules in different markets, and if one market is selling better, we could give some beds to another market. And we've often, as the UK, taken beds off other markets when they're struggling to fill them.
Okay. Another issue that we just probably ought to quickly touch on, because it was in the headlines so much recently, was the migrant crisis and how that may or may not have impacted on your forward planning. Has it been something that you've had to take into account when you're sort of looking at your programmes for next year, or is it, again, it's something that you think will be short-term and people will move on?
I think from TUI's perspective, it's fairly short-term and we'll move on. We saw an impact on COS. We didn't really see an impact on anywhere else in Greece, so I think it's pretty short-term. In fact, I think you've got to be careful not to overcorrect sometimes with these things.
Okay, Andrew, same for you?
Yeah, I would agree. Fairly relaxed about that issue. I would imagine cross-channel ferry operators and Eurotunnel may feel differently.
Yeah.
But certainly from a Mediterranean and European scheduled carrier perspective, the impact has been relatively small.
Okay. All right, and then just before we move on from destination, because you mentioned then talking about Sri Lanka, but you also announced last night that you were looking at places like Vietnam and Cambodia, and also you mentioned Caribbean, but you said last night St. Lucia, Barbados, Antigua. So is that in addition to what you do, or is it spreading the risk more, so you're moving away from the short-haul ones that perhaps more risky?
Well, that will be in addition. So part of the capacity growth that I talked about is we're getting new 787-900s, which are larger 787s. We're going to put those into the Caribbean, and we think that we can grow customer demand. We still fly 787s on short haul, so if we did see some issue with short-term demand in some of those short mid-haul areas, we could even then potentially, once we've established those programs, move people onto long haul. Okay. It's just the price point that's the issue.
Okay, all right. And just before we go, city breaks. People want to know, I'm sure you didn't mention too much there, but you said that's an opportunity for you on all those cities that you just reeled off there. So when will we see you launching a city break programme?
We're just working through the technology that we will use to do that. But I would hope it would be fairly soon because, as I said, I'm not keen on ideas taking 2 and 3 years to launch, so it'll be soon. Fairly soon.
Okay. All right, let's just move on to some of the other subjects that you covered in your presentations, and just the emerging markets one, Dominic, when you were talking about China there. And we did an interview with you before, and you said there's like an absolute, your history is littered with companies that have got it wrong. So did you make any mistakes in your, in what you've been doing, and do you want to just sort of maybe share any of the learnings that you had?
So, I mean, I think we learned a lot, particularly over the last few years. But China is such a fast-moving market. You have to constantly adapt to be successful in that market. So I'd say the 2 key areas we learned about was the delivery of the product on board. So getting the food right and the entertainment right is critical to the Chinese market, and they are truly expecting a very well executed local Chinese food. However, they don't want it delivered solely by Chinese waiters, for example. They want Western Western service style and Western waiters and waitresses, because that gives it a feeling of premiumness. The same thing from entertainment. They don't want solely Chinese entertainment, they want international type entertainment. So actually getting that balance right is very important. And then the other thing I'd say we learned a lot about was the distribution. When we first went into China, we thought that it would operate in a typical way that markets around the world operate. It doesn't. It's a little bit more like a charter market in China, and that's a very different way to working. And I'll give you an example of how it was different, which is when we launched Quantum of the Seas in New York, and Lucy, I think you were there for that. We had, on the first night, weren't you?
No, not invited.
So it was... my twin sister. I had dinner with UK travel agents on the first night. We had a really nice night, and complimenting about the food, and we were talking about the ship and that type of thing. And it was a fantastic evening. The next night I had with the managing directors of Chinese travel agencies. And we talked a little bit, but to be honest, they spent most of the time on their phones. And I thought, okay, it's because I'm boring, that's fair enough. And they were kind of just, they were on their phones. And after a while, I asked one of them, I said, well, what are you sending messages, or, business, what kind of thing are you doing? He said, oh, we're selling. So I said, well, what do you mean? And he said they were on WeChat, which is a cross between Twitter and Facebook, and it's really the most common social media platform in China. They were taking photos of the food and the ship. They'd uploaded it to their, and these are big companies, these are multi-billion-dollar distributors in China. They'd uploaded it to their websites during dinner, and as we were having dinner, one of the customers had chartered the ship for a sailing, which is a multi-million-pound deal that he had done because someone had seen the feed and liked what they saw so much. So I use that as an example of the pace of change in China. And the opportunity for China is incredible, but you do have to adapt what you do. And have we made mistakes? We've made lots of mistakes as we've gone through, and we will continue to. The key thing is to stay flexible and adapt.
Okay. And Nick, you've had a China operation since about 2 years, since about 2003 with the China Travel Service. So is that a growing business for you? And are there any threats to that now that Thomas Cook are owned or partly owned by Chinese shareholders? Are you sort of looking at that differently at all?
I think we've never gone into it in a big way. So I think we've had a JV for many years.
Yeah.
I think there's been a number of decision points where we had to decide, did we really want to go in and put significant investment? So we've never decided to really pursue it actively.
You're going to now you've heard Dominic's stats.
Well, now I've heard Dominic's stats, yeah, I think we might look to put Thomson Cruises there. It's fascinating.
Well, run for your money, Dominic.
Very difficult market to learn, Nick. Very difficult.
I've got more questions, but let's get the house lights up for a second and throw it over to you. I can see a hand waving. It's Ian Brooks. Is it Ian Brooks? Oh, good. Can we get a mic to Ian?
Hello. I'd like to ask the panel, primarily two of the panel, who are about to change their brand and drop a very, very well-known brand in the travel industry that they've had for a long, long time and focus around a single brand. So I'd just like to ask them a little bit about whether that was an easy or difficult decision to make and what were the drivers behind it. I guess you know which two companies and brands I'm talking about.
You're the most recent. Go on.
You're not changing your...
not unless you've done a breaking news thing.
So I think most of you probably saw that we announced last week that we're moving to a single brand strategy. As you heard in my remarks, the kind of thrust of Monarch's restructure was very much about simplification and a more straightforward, simple business. So it kind of makes sense for us to have one brand rather than multiple brands. We're moving from Avro, a Cosmos, Somewhere to Stay, and using just the Monarch brand. In our particular case, we didn't own the Cosmos brand. It's owned by the former owners of Monarch, and they run a very successful business called Cosmos Tours and Cruises, which is well known in the UK for river cruises and other tours, and also around Europe and in the US. But for our business now that we are separate from that company, we were in a situation where it made sense for us to do it. It clearly doesn't always make sense, but for us it did.
Yeah, I think Ian, it was an incredibly difficult decision to make to move from the Thomson brand. It's been around for many years, and and has a huge legacy behind it. But I think now as we do look to enter this phase of growth, I think that having one brand and having TUI as the brand, I think will help to enable us to really grow the business. It clearly makes sense. We're going to be the last brand, the last business to change. So our Dutch business changed 2 weeks ago. We have Belgium and the Nordics. We will learn from the experience. And we have to really make sure we get this right, because if we get it wrong, it could be very expensive. So we want to be the last brand to go. But ultimately, I think having TUI as one power brand across all of the European markets makes a lot of sense. It was interesting. I was in Ireland last week, and you talk about the customer journey there, where you book a Falcon holiday, you get on an aircraft operated by Sunwing with a Canadian crew, and then you get to resort and you're looked after by someone from Thomson. So I think the customer journey has been quite confusing, and this will really help us to get consistency.
Okay, any more questions? Too much wine at lunch, maybe? I think we've got one at the back.
I don't know if you can hear this, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a question to gentlemen from TUI. I know we don't particularly like awkward questions at conferences, but if we're the customer, and you're going to focus on the customer, which is what you said, do we get to understand when we get price parity back?
Well, I think price parity is a whole different subject compared to branding, but I think that we are comfortable at the moment in that there is a difference between the prices we have online and the prices that we have in store. I think there is a different level of service that's given when you book in store, and I think customers are used to paying for service. And whilst we can justify that service and we can justify the fee that we charge for it, then I think we will likely continue with having a difference in our pricing.
Okay, any more questions from the floor? Let me just ask you a question very quickly, Andrew, about your presentation about the demise of charter flying. And you mentioned there that operators need to work more closely with low-cost scheduled carriers. But then you mentioned that there's clearly this cultural gap to bridge, and you said they need to start conversations. But what can they really do to bridge that gap? Because it is, as you say, they're not poles apart, but there's some way to go to meet in the middle, isn't there?
Well, if you look at where we're sitting today, EasyJet fly to Kalamata, and this is a great place. It's got potential for package holidays, obviously. It makes absolute sense if you've got an aluminium tube taking off from Gatwick and landing in Kalamata that you use that one rather than go charter another one and water down the whole market. I mean, fundamentally, the flight is a flight. I don't think that charter brings enough advantages. And as I said earlier, I'm carving out those big vertically integrated groups like TUI and Thomas Cook, all those specialist airlines that just do charter, like Titan, for example. But why can't Costa Navarino and tour operators and EasyJet make that work? Well, really, it's down to technology. It's down to financial arrangements. It's down to cooperation. And all of those things can be overcome, and there's a willingness, I think, on all parties to overcome them. I mean, certainly from Monarch's perspective, we're carrying 6.6 million passengers a year. The vast majority of those are flight only. We have a tour operator that is packaging a couple of 100,000 customers a year. We would be delighted to carry passengers for other tour operators. Because obviously that's good business for us.
You said just last week you're going to bring so much more of your own program into your own flying, and so will you have enough seats left to supply other tour operators? Like, in fact, you've been taking seats off Monarch this year as part of your third-party flying.
Yeah, I mean, you need a mix. It's a little bit like a risk reduction strategy. You wouldn't want all your eggs in one basket. Ultimately, as the airline, you're paying for the asset. The asset's very expensive. A narrow-body aircraft's going to cost you 40 million. You might have 100 employees wrapped around it, and you could be renting it for 200,000-300,000 a month. If you make a mistake with something like that and you haven't got enough business, then you're going to be in trouble. So you want a nice, diverse range of business. These days, consumers are used to buying air travel direct on a digital platform. and that's not going to change. Some of them do it through travel agents, normally for the more complicated journeys. So, you know, if I'm wanting business class flights to South America, I would probably use a travel agent. In fact, I have done recently. And if I'm booking flights to go and see my brother in France, I would just do it on the internet myself. The tour operator can represent another part of that and also give a bit of resilience to the airline revenue income. And, you know, I think that as long as it's economically viable and as long as there's, you know, there is a spirit of cooperation, then it ought to be a growing area.
Okay. And I think just finally, because we're short of time, but Nick, you just were talking about your third-party flying there, and a couple of questions. You know, you said it was 60,000 holidays you've done so far, but you were going to really grow it. And will it always be in short haul, or will you look at also taking scheduled flying with long haul destinations as well?
I think certainly so predominantly we're looking at short and mid haul, and we really were finding our feet this year, and I think we know how to do it better for next year. We will look at long haul, and particularly where we're looking at cities, I mentioned, that won't be on our own flying, that will be on third-party flying. And also when we do look at places like Vietnam and Cambodia, we'll look to add a bit more flexibility into the programme by then using scheduled flying as well to provide different durations or tour options.
Okay. All right, well, we are out of time, I'm afraid, but please, will you join me very much in thanking our patrons today, Dominic, Andrew and Nick. Thank you very much.